Good morning, Mr. James. You are embarking on this long, difficult, strenuous journey to explain the 1500 pages of Ludwig Klages, the spirit as the adversary of the soul. So maybe you could enjoy a Pelasgian message from somebody who's already been there, reading Ludwig Klages books, practically all of them, in old originals, in those long German sentences that stretch over half a page of an old book published in 1933, preferably taking them to faraway journeys into the arms of great Mother Nature, reading them along lying by the forest brooks or Pelasgian seas in Atlantis to old island of Crete. So I have been there since 30 years. And if you see the pages of those books, you will see that I have marked with a pencil the act of cognition, the act of reading that enable us to understand reasonably the hidden message as a kind of a pyramid of secret corridors that have to be rediscovered, these cognitive acts, so that there are short glimpses of the Pelasgian soul experience and body experience. This body and soul are one organic unity. So, well, you will work hard on it, and I can give you some golden apples, fruits of my journey to the Sargasso Sea of Ludwig Klages. By the way, Ludwig Klages was a chemist, very rationally educated German chemist. If he's a doctor of chemistry, and he studied then in the 1920s, then you could imagine how exact his logical thinking developed, how exactly he was thinking, and he intentionally then, after having had some mystical experiences in his 20s, decided to devote his whole life and his professional sharp logical thinking to defending his mystical experiences, to defend life against the onslaught of the cognitive apparatus of modern science and willpower, the cognitive willpower, to subdue the planet, the biosphere. He was in contact with those cosmics. Now, this was a group in Munich, and there he have encountered Schuller and others who were truly, mystics, and they have never collected their insights to a systematic philosophical text. So this is what Klages did. So it is in no way possible to interpret him as an irrationalist. He definitely is not. He's very rational, but he uses the cognitive ability of reasoning, logic, to look back, not to invent by his egoistic willpower, not to fantasize by his ego how it should be, how it could be, how it was, but to name, let us name the insights, the visions that he has had. And as you know, philosophers who are poets at the same time can spend the whole life by circling around the treasure moments, as T.S. Eliot had said, several experiences of unity with the whole in your young days may power you for the rest of your life, and you will be lucky to relive them in a kind of mystical, ecstatic state of soul and body, free from the ego, either by dissolving it passively, which is not correct formulation. You cannot dissolve by a command. The ego dissolves by being overwhelmed by the beauty of nature, of a special moment, by love, by ecstasy, maybe by some drugs. Or you can, as a sportsman, as a warrior, as a new Argonaut, in this ecstasy of the body, you can, simply dynamite your ego away from the body, down, and that's why also from the soul, in an ecstasy of running, fighting, swimming, and you will be happy and joyous, let us say it's a better word, to live this again and again, and then in between you will try to name it, to comment on it, and build it into your own system of ideas by looking backward at the experiences. This basically is the return to the so-called Promethean age, as Klages divides the time epoch during which the spark of the Geist penetrates the soul, the human soul field. I will introduce this concept of field, functionally describing what is happening, so that we do not have to argue about being, about names for some ideas, but we see it all plastically happening as it grows, the influence of the Geist on the soul field. And that's why also the method I have developed after 20 years of circling around these experiences, mystical experiences I have had, trying to name them. I have discovered that I cannot simply sit down and punch it into the computer or write it linearly with my hand. The linearity of writing immediately, at least in my case, closes the full possibility of merging with the soul field of the biosphere of other organisms. Albert North Whitehead would say that organisms are either large and small. Large organisms are then the seas, the lakes, the mountains, and small organisms are the plants and the individual plants and animals and man. So I have had many of these experiences since my childhood, and I have, considered this to be normal. And then I entered the Promethean age, in which I tried to use my rationality to explain myself, and I have found that it was almost impossible, because we were talking about, different experiences. The most of the human beings since, let us say, Renaissance, live in the so-called Heraclitean stage of the invasion of the spirit into the human soul field that is subdued it completely, and it has slowly penetrated even the body, not only the soul field. When the soul field gets penetrated and overwhelmed by the spirit, by the Geist, it starts to be logical. It starts to be systematical. It creates conceptual models of the biosphere, and loses itself in conceptual pyramids like religion, philosophy, and science. But when the body gets overwhelmed by the spirit, and it is in congruence with the Klagesian principle that the body is the expression of the soul, when the soul is completely captured by the spirit, then the body shall move and shall, form and misshape, let us say, almost kill the biosphere of the planet under the command of the will to power that is cognitive. Finally, you could see the influence of the spirit like killing all life, and that what you criticize with your friends and those other guys who are you want to speed it up, the accelerationism, the fascist like kind of futurism of technology, is the final expression of it, when the human being is simply Ahasverism is a term, a word coined by Klages for a condition of the soul where it is completely crucified, let us say, by the spirit, by the cognitive will to power, and it is pure will. It wills willing, and it is, obsessed by reshaping the surface of the planet, by making it into a kind of matrix final machine-like monster, where you have this transhumanism there, and robots, and genetic manipulation, and wars, and this is Ahasverism. Having to destroy life like a kind of impulse all the time. So let us give you some of the insights I have had. The method I have been forced by Mother Nature to find for naming these and describing these visions I have had and experiences is this Bard's method of lying on the divan and feeling inspiration and naming the visions I have. Watching the mirror of the soul with my naming capability and using the rationality that is then kind of dormant but still used and in the service of life, so that I do not lose the cognitive, even sometimes conceptual frameworks, but they are completely at the service of the soul, body, and life. Okay, this would be the Promethean stage. Okay, the early stage of the invasion of the spirit into the soul field. In human history, kind of like Klages would say, it would be some, 5 to 10,000 years ago, and then the speeding up of it into the Heraclitean stage of invasion of spirits into the soul since the Renaissance. And by the way, not only since the Renaissance, it manifested itself in machines. Machines that are monsters, let us say, from another dimension, from the cognitive mental realm of the spirit, that are, entering the living sphere, the living biosphere. But preparation for it happened in the Middle Ages, in those 1,000 years of scholasticism. And Klages has a different interpretation of Renaissance than almost everybody else. We celebrate Renaissance as a return to the typical scholar, typical philosopher celebrates Renaissance as a return to Greece and Rome, the antiquity, as a being free from the dogmas of Christianity, of scholasticism. But Klages writes that the 1,000 years of solving impossible metaphysical programs of Christianity have, trained the human spirit then in such a way that it accumulated enormous amounts of willpower. I mean, if you want to solve something which is actually a koan, how to explain perceived reality, phenomenal reality of life, how to make it congruent with some conceptual crazy framework of Hebrew and Christian metaphysics, which is purely invented. And in my studies I have found that it originates in Zoroastrianism. Then you will be, forced to think hard. But you will stay in this realm of speculation. Okay. When then this framing is left to fall, you do not believe anymore in Hebrew Christian metaphysics, then this accumulated will to power bursts into empiric science. And the fruit of it is machines, okay, and complete control of the biosphere by violent acts of technology. First science, rational science, physics, chemistry, and so on, and then using it in applied technology as a complete control destruction. Until today, we have this transhumanism and total control projects and stuff like that. So, let us see, the method I have is lying down on the divan or somewhere on a beautiful spot in nature, and putting the guitar to my left side and having the neck of the guitar on my brow on the lobus praecentralis, that part of the brain where correlation of the ego spark has sedimented into the brain cells of the cognitive commanding center. And using vocalizations like short periods of childlike la 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 la, I keep myself, true to my phenomenal experience. But I name it, and I use the dormant logic, syntax, and grammar of the languages I know to communicate it rationally. So let us first open to you the secret of how the spirit entered the human soul field. The spirit, the Geist, is an acosmic entity, according to Klages. It comes from the realm. It is not from this cosmos, not only from this solar system or this galaxy. Completely different. Its essence is unknown, cannot be known, because its attributes are timelessness and spacelessness. It is without time and space, and everything in our universe is in time, changing, and it is somewhere in space, even though they can be, combined in various unusual ways, like the theory of relativity, Einstein, and so on. But it's always, even distorted space is still space, even distorted time, condensed time is still time. But if you have an entity that is totally timeless and spaceless, that you can look at its effect on the human soul field, you can judge it by its effect, which basically is the phenomenological approach. In phenomenology, especially in Klagesian biocentric phenomenology, that is, phenomenology as a science, as a philosophical discipline pursued in the interest of life, biocentric, we do not ask about essences, because essences are frozen phenomena. You have perceived in your life so many individual trees phenomenally. This tree behind my window, typical kind of red oak with mighty stem and red leaves, beautiful kind of skull opening to the blue sky. I have watched it for 15-20 years, taking pictures all different seasons of the year, in snow, in summer, in spring, in light, in dark, in rain, in storm, and it's always different. These are the phenomenal experiences. Then there is another tree, a birch, close to the lake, and you can watch it. A willow on the road to the lake. Again, similarly, walking this road for many, many years, every day, and staring in a kind of Pelasgian wonder at the shapes, of the forms, of the colors, of the motions, the light on it, the sound of the waves, the lake, and so on. All of them completely different. these are phenomenal trees, experiences. Then you can come home and say, what is a tree? You open an encyclopedia and you find that the concept in a tree is a stem. It's a plant, larger height, roots, branches, leaves, fruits, okay, and so on. So this is a conceptual entity that exists only in your conceptual mind. And here, mind you, Anglo-Saxon thinkers have this terrible word mind, which is difficult to overcome because they subsume under it all what happens inside the soul field. So let us never use this word mind. Let us use about soul fields and the functional changes in the soul field due to the intrusion of the spirit. Okay. So, what happened? And it happened historically for the human race as a whole. I think originally on very many spots on the planet, various cultures acquired the spirit independently, as also all children, even we, the Europeans, acquire or are infected, are invaded by the Geist, each one of us separately in our early childhood. When we are born, like, just coming out of the mother of the body and until relatively, later, the second year of age usually, the ego spark invades the human soul field. So that my vision is that the entity Geist is spread somehow mysteriously through our universe as a kind of quality of the other universe, which is timeless and spaceless. And whenever a kind of opening occurs through which it can penetrate into our universe, it is forced to do it automatically. And the opening is only one opening. On our planet at least, it is the human soul field. And there it penetrates and starts to work slowly, deliberately, to kill all life. And it does it by separating body and soul of the living organism, human organism, by making the soul bodiless, which means, neurotic, hysterical, and finally hating life and losing itself in conceptual worlds, acceleration, transhumanism, robots, leaving the human body at all. And on this other side, when body loses the soul, it is soulless, it simply becomes a machine. First under the cognitive will to power commands of the Heraclitean, soul. This may confuse you, that when I say command of the Heraclitean soul, the will to power commands the machine body through the acts of the Heraclitean soul field. This is a great mystery that took me several years to see through in kind of mystical diving deep down into my phenomenal experience. You see, everything what happens is still always a soul field, but it is nevertheless then changed. All cognitive acts, all the influences of the spirit, of the Geist, are expression of a soul field, but it is a changed soul field. Nietzsche would say decadent, life inimical soul field, but still a soul field. Like if you have a body that is ill, the illness is still the body. The metabolism in the body is out of harmony. The illness is not something outside the body, okay? The viruses, yes. The viruses come from outside, but they do only change the metabolic functions of the body by forcing the body to change the metabolic functions according to the software program of the virus. That's why Klages rightly calls Geist, when functionally describing it, as a virus entering the human soul field. Now, how does it happen? As I've said, it's timeless, it's soulless, and doesn't have any agency of its own, like it does not have energy sources. It has to be a virus. And the only small opening in which it can enter is the human soul field in a certain stage of its development, individually for each one of us and collectively for the human race in a certain development of its culture. When it enters, it must find similar conditions. It must find something that is without time and without space. And this is where I had this idea, vision, when I was studying Husserlian phenomenology and Zen Buddhism, that what is the present moment? Yeah? What is the present moment? As a Pelasgian, I have a completely different conception of time, a kind of circular spiral conception of time, which saves me from the linearity and apocalyptic will to power conception of time of the spirit. But nevertheless, what is the present moment? And there is Husserl, who showed me the idea of retention, which was congruent with the very detailed Klages description in the first volume of his book about how concepts arise in the human soul field. So, to make it kind of visual for you, Husserl supposes that a mirror of the soul, and this is also what Klages uses several times, mirror of the soul. And I would warmly suggest to you not to use the word image consciousness, but to use the term mirror of the soul, because consciousness is a completely spirit product inside the human soul field. Okay, because in a German word, Bewusstsein is a participle of a verb, wissen, to know. Bewusst is to know, to be knowing, and if you find it in the dictionary what it means, Bewusstsein, it is to be in the knowledge always of something, of the object. So in the word consciousness, which is in English, it is lost because it is probably from the Latin roots. And the typical for Klages is that he does not use any words of Latin or Greek origin, only exceptionally, or when he dismantles them to show where the mistake is in the etymology. He uses German compositions, original Germanic roots, and it is a great help for visualization. Similarly, Heidegger. It makes it difficult to read, even for Germans, because there are new words which he coins, but they are composed of old Germanic roots, and all these roots have a visual possibility. You can see it. What is the meaning of the word? You can see it spatially, dynamically. So, what happens when the spark invades? So, both Husserl and Klages describe it functionally. This is very important. We have to describe what happens inside the soul field functionally, not giving simply names, like, nouns. It's an endless concept, because nouns, as Klages has proved also, came later into the old languages. First, we were describing what is happening. Verbs were earlier than nouns, like phenomena were earlier, experiences were earlier than concepts. Concepts are frozen phenomena. Rightly, you have pointed out that it becomes virulent with Socrates, and then with Plato, who makes these Socratic concepts to kind of religious realm of permanent, holy, somewhere else, existing, forever unchanging ideas. But even Plato had difficulty with it, and he started to conceptualize his ideas firstly as images, as little eidolos, little pictures, eidolos, and only later, under the influence of Pythagoras. Pythagoreans are the Kabbalists of the antiquity. They are the obsessed ones with numbers. Everything is a number. And under the influence of Pythagoreans, he changed these little eidolos into, let us say, matrix of numbers. Like, first, if Plato was young, he was thinking about the ideal horse as a horse, nevertheless. Ideal dimensions, somewhere in the Platonic realm of ideal horses, ideal trees, ideal man, ideal whatever, but it was a kind of spatial image. And then later he said, under the influence of Pythagoreans, let us measure all the distances between various points on the surface of this body, and then define them mathematically as numbers. And this is the straight road to computers and to artificial intelligence. It took some 2,000 years, but it was already opened. So, what happened when the Geist entered the human soul field? Both Klages and Husserl give this kind of functional image of a mirror that has to turn back for a fraction of a time unit I don't even say a second, because a second is an artificial conceptual unit dividing time flow. It is a fraction of some minimal time unit. And the mirror of the soul field turns back, and only in human beings, not in animals. Animals live permanently in the present moment, okay? Open to it, looking forward, searching for food, experiencing weather phenomena, and running away from predators, whatever. They are there all the time. They do not look back. If somebody would have objections like elephants remember and animals remember, some animals who are lost and they come home, they remember their owners and they love them, show signs of sympathy. That is different. That is the presence, the recognizing again, the feeling again the presence of somebody, a human friend, is in the present moment. Okay, but they do not walk like and sit down in the forest like a lion or in the jungle and thinks back. No, turns back. A human soul field does this unconsciously, let us say. Why? That is another contribution of Klages. Klages defines the transition from the animal kingdom to the human realm by defining the distance, by enlarging the distance into which the human soul field can expand. This is what differentiates us from animals. We can walk alongside the lake and look over the waters to distant mountains. Our soul field in this moment expands truly far, far away, and it melts with the soul field of the mountains. This is a contribution from Rupert Sheldrake, that he did those tests, empirical tests, about how the soul fields can merge, So, and the quality, the phenomenal experience we humans have and animals have has its ontology, the place where it actuates in the merging between the two soul fields, what you perceive phenomenally, the quality it has, the feeling, the sympathy or antipathy you feel, arises in the intersection of those two soul fields. So you go alongside a lake and you are being drawn to those mountains in far away distance. Animals do not do that. They naturally merge, their soul field merges with another soul field, but it is very close to the body, the smells, the taste, okay, and so the feeling, the hardness of the terrain and so on. So this is the difference between animal and man. The extent into which the human soul field can expand away from the body. The brain is not the soul. Naturally, it is only a correlation. And you can measure until you die the electromagnetic impulses in the brain cells, and you will get no soul experiences, no phenomena. It is only a correlation in the hardware. And because the soul field enlarges, the world in which the humans live becomes complex, becomes large, and even the perceptual world of the present moment is very complex. The artificial intelligence people have this great problem how to explain, the phenomenal vision of the present moment in people, in human beings, how to imitate it in robots, because it is a wonder. There is so much, and because there is so much to be perceived for the human soul field, it had to adapt this functional change in perception. It developed a necessity to switch, to flip the mirror of the soul for a fraction of a second backward, to keep the visual image first of that which is just now disappearing from the present moment. It retained it in a kind of visual echo, but it was a moment of stoppage. It stopped the endless flow of phenomena that the animals had, that the animals experienced. And in this moment, I don't even know if it is a picosecond or whatever, very, very short. By the way, the Vedanta, the Brahmins, masters of introspections, have had a similar vision that what they called consciousness, vimanya, arises in short bursts of realization from the bhavana, from the unconscious stream of experiences, and they speculated that it may be like 1,000 times, 10,000 times in a second that a kind of frozen image of the perceived surrounding solidifies and then produces the illusion, the maya of, flowing time and the perception of presence. Well, side note. So, in this moment of relative slowing down, even a fraction of time complete stoppage of the Husserlian retention, Husserl then speculates that our lived presence is a combination of these retentions and the so-called protensions. Protensions is a kind of imagination, a kind of projection of the immediate future. When I push the glass over the table edge, it is falling down and it crashes. But I already imagined this because I had, seen it several times, and I know the laws of physics and so on. So I expect that it's going to fall and crash, and I even imagine it. And so the moment I see the glass falling is combined of those little retentions and the imagined protensions, and this together it makes a kind of ball, a sphere of the present moment. Accordingly, mystics who can enlarge by obliterating completely the ego, they can enlarge their lived presence into enormous distances. They say they walk through the Akashic halls, they read the Akashic records, and they are mystically inspired. Phenomenally, in Mike Klages and Rupert Sheldrake descriptions, it means that the present is ever growing. Our human present is a sphere, like a tree, it grows and grows and grows, and whatever there was, whatever happened, is still there, vibrating in a superposition, like the rings of the tree. The early years are still there. If you cut the stem, the traces are there, the rings are there. And it is growing all the time. The leaves are growing. We are experiencing all the time, present moment, growing. And what is reducing it into a kind of cognitive, linear perception of time, looking at your watch and smartphone and catching the train and stuff like that, is the ego. It is kind of a lid on this enormous ball, a tree of personally, of individual experience, time. It's everything all there, vibrating in superposition, your young days. And you can re-experience it if you dive deep into the seas and lakes and forests of your soul landscape. No. Individual soul, nobody else can do it, only you, into your soul field. So what happened then when the spirit invaded the soul field? It immediately felt somehow, quote unquote, the congruity, the similarity between the Husserlian retention moment and its, let us say, quote unquote, essence, its timelessness and spacelessness. It entered as a viral software into the retention of the soul field. And then it formed a trace where we were. It didn't put any material entity. It simply changed a part of the soul field according to its software viral programming. And this was a spark that congealed in the soul field as a permanently unmoved, timeless and spaceless entity, the ego spark, which is then not a spark, ego not, is the first expression of the soul changes in the morphology of the soul field when it is attacked by the spirit, when the spirit enters into it as a viral software. So we have this ego. What happens with the soul? We have said we shall use the word mirror of the soul instead of consciousness. Animals are not conscious, but they all have a functioning mirror of the soul. It is large or it is small, depends on the extension of the soul field away from the body. Soul is a field phenomena, analogous to the electromagnetic soul field of electromotors. Motors have rotor and stator, which are hard metallic parts and some wiring. And yet the electromagnetic field spreads far away from the hardware parts. And it is even measurable. And it has influence on other electromagnetic fields. Even the human body is running on 0.8 ampere, in the nervous system. It has also small electromagnetic field. That's why we feel uneasy in the presence of very strong electromagnetic fields. There is a merge between those fields always. What happens also with the mirror of the soul? The mirror of the soul, when it freezes in one little knot, for in a certain space of the soul field, there happens the effect of a mirror mirroring another mirror. The mirror turns upon itself. You can imagine it visually like a small ball. This is the speck, the knot of the ego. It freezes due to the software of the viral spirit, the Geist, and it is coated like a mirror, and the surrounding soul field is still mirroring everything what is coming from outside or even inside of interoperception and extroperception. But now around this little ball, solid ball, the mirroring surface of the ball mirrors the mirroring of the mirror. No, it turns upon itself. What arises is self-mirroring, which is then called rightly self-consciousness, because there is immediately the ego and then the stuff mirrored. These are the objects, the subject and object arises. Okay. First wave of, interference. You can see it, you can see the soul field also as a clear pond in the forest that is mirroring everything above it without selection. You throw a small stone inside, there is, interference. The surface of the pond becomes wavy. Waves are running from the point of entry of this stone onto the speckless mirror surface. The stone falling through the body of water is analogous to the ego spark, ego knot, ego little ball, okay? The bubbles arising of oxygen being, taken down by the stone into the body of water, the bubbles coming out and interferences on the surface are analogous to the functional changes of the soul field. But it is always a soul field, only changed in its function. So what are the functions that are induced by this first attack of the spirit on the soul field? First, we have said the mirroring of itself, the self and the objects. Now you can use the word consciousness because you are already in the realm of transforming the soul field into cognition. Next, immediately when there is self-consciousness, there is will to preserve the self. There is selection of I want this, the ego wants this, ego wants that. At the beginning, in human children, when this arises, there is certainly no cognitive reflection on it, but there is preference of puddings. Little Peter does not talk about himself as I want. He says, Peter wants more chocolate pudding or something like that. That is already the emergence of the ego, but it yet does not have the word for it, I, okay. There is also in child psychology, Vygotsky, as the writer, is the description of how the ego arises in a 2-year-old child, roughly, now functionally described from outside. The child crawls on the floor and encounters a mirror, and it sees another child. In the mirror, it certainly thinks it's another animal child there crawling, and it is attracted to it by sympathy, similarity. It crawls to it and wants to touch it, and oh wow, it hits the cold surface of the mirror, and it is, surprised and forgets about it. Next time it comes, it notices that the child looks, well, it moves the hand as I move the hand, and suddenly it arises the mirror image as identical with me, with the self, and it is the birth of the ego. Let us make a break to be sure we are recording this. Very good, we're recording it, and I already had the right intuition because it is exactly 1 hour. And I have to look at the watch because I have a tennis game at 12 where I dissolve my ego by the ecstasy of Cosmogonic Eros in the beautiful warm wind and colors and blue and green and on the fields of Mars, of the red sand of the tennis court close to the lake, here at the City of Constance, where I have studied phenomenology at the university in the 1980s. There I will experience the Pelasgian ecstasy of the so-called new Argonauts. You can see dozens of videos on my channel on YouTube talking about the new Argonauts and new Pelasgians. It is a practical suggestion how to return to these soul conditions of primordial unity with the elementary eros of nature. But we return to the hardcore phenomenology of Ludwig Klages, Husserl, and Rupert Sheldrake. We have the morphogenetic field, soul field, being entered by the spark of the Geist. First reiteration, first transformation of the soul field is the self-mirroring, arousal of consciousness, self-consciousness. Immediately, preference arises. Worry, the Heideggerian, being to death, has here its origin. Animals don't know that. They don't feel that they are going to die, and they never die before they really, are crushed by the predators until they live a kind of happy action life, always being in the present. That's why we love animals, because they remind us of our early childhood. So the will to power arises. The will, I want this, I don't want that. Okay. Simultaneously with that arises another transformation of the soul field. That is the freezing of the phenomena into, objects with sharp edges and solid shapes. The Cartesian Mare Geometrico is born. Well, now very important note to the functional description of flow of energy. In animals, in little children without an ego, and in artists and in mystics who are in the ecstasy of cosmogonic eros, they have temporarily dissolve the ego. The energy flow is always from one soul field to the other soul field in a form of attraction or repulsion. This is the metaphysical realm Klages postulates that the biosphere is composed of souls. He does not yet use the term soul fields. That's why we are grateful to Rupert Sheldrake and others who make it possible for us to visualize it. There are so many soul fields. Every organism, be it small or large, according to Whitehead, has a soul field as the software, as the meaning, as the experiential quality, okay? And it has a body, as an organic body, as an expression of life. Expression of the soul field. They both together form the unity, the organic unity, life. It is a bipolar unity. It is not a balance, a static balance. It is a dynamic bipolar balance, like yin and yang. It's a psychosomatic phenomena. When the soul dominates very strongly, there is a natural tendency for the soul dominance to dissipate into the dominance of the body. Like I now am under a very strong dominance of the soul field in the variation of a kind of rational description of Klagesian worldview and phenomenology and Husserlian. I still am, I hope I'm understood, but I use this method of the Bard to continuously dissolve the tendency to become, scientific and logical and dogmatic, egoistically presenting my knowledge, I always dissolve it into this childish enthusiasm, this eros of knowledge, okay? Being surprised again, I rediscover the wisdom of Klages and Husserl and Sheldrake and Heidegger and Krishnamurti and Alan Watts and Rudolf Steiner, whom I have all read in a cognitive, concentrated, style a long time ago. So, what happens then in the natural condition of the biosphere without the ego? There are so many soul fields, the forests, the rivers, the lakes, the lions, the tigers, the eagles, the whales, the rabbits, the bees, the flowers, the winds, the mountains, the desert, whatever you want. And they are mingling, they are attracting each other according to the principle of similarity is attracting each other, and dissimilarity is a repulsion, okay, of the soul field. And the life of the planet as a biosphere, all those jungles and forests and fields and meadows, is expression of this software of life, ceaselessly, dissolving into each other and combining and embodying. This is the important word. Embodying, okay, of the soul field into the living matter of the biosphere. And there, the dominant function is the larger, the stronger soul field attracts the weaker. Like a dog that is thirsty emanates the thirst soul field. It is a condition of his soul that has a kind of imaginary cloud, and there is the soul field of the river or the water pond somewhere nearby, and it is larger, and it attracts the soul field of the dog, of the thirsty soul field of the dog, and the expression of this attraction is the bodily motion of the dog towards the source, towards the physical water. And in the moment of union of the cells of the dog with the water when it is drinking it, this pull is satisfied. Okay, this is the typical instinct motion of the bodies of all the animals. They are being drawn via the merging of soul field of their smaller soul field. The bees, they want this soul field. They are attracted by those soul fields of the flowers, and they are wheezing like bees can do very fast, because their soul field is small, and the meadow over there and the blossoming forest is so mighty as a soul field that it literally sucks in like a bullet the small soul field of the bee into the large soul field of the flowering forest. And the little body of the bee is, shot in a certain sense through this kind of channel, attracting channel into the forest, and then it until it is, drinking profusely the smells and the liquids from the flowers. It is not satisfied. Now, that is what is happening all the time in any healthy biosphere. Now comes the ego of man into the game, and it changes the flow of energy. We must always have this great a priori that whatever manifests in the human realm is the function of the soul and the body. Always. Cognition is only a transformation of the soul field. It does not have any agency. That is why we are saved by the Cosmogonic Eros and by the wisdom of Klages and other mystics. But Klages has the advantage of being a chemist, also a rational thinker, and he is one of the few ones, practically the only one, who can explain to us so that we can understand it with our modern scientific egos. Okay, other mystics have to recourse to poetry and mythology. Nietzsche similarly does not have any scientific hardware conceptuality to describe his will to power. By the way, Nietzsche is one of the philosophers who Klages has devoted enormous time of his life, and he has read every word of Nietzsche, and he has understood his predicament, and he has written a wonderful monography about Nietzsche, which would completely overthrow all Nietzschean scholarship on the whole planet if it was recognized. It is called Nietzsche's Psychological Achievements, an original Nietzsche's psychologischen Errungenschaften. A fantastic book, a book that helped me to overcome Nietzsche. Because I, as a sportsman, as a hero, as a new Argonaut, warrior of a Slavic origin, was attracted to Nietzsche when I was searching for the meaning of my experiences, and for a long time I was a pure Nietzschean. But then I had this, this hot taste of destruction on my lips and in my soul, and I wanted to crush everything with the will to power. And it was only Klages who explained to me by a very, very detailed analysis of Nietzsche's works that there is a contradiction in Nietzsche himself, that he has two conceptions of the will to power, and one of them is that what I have just described. This is analogous to the attraction and repulsion of the biological, organic soul fields in the biosphere of the earth. That is the Dionysian conception of the will to power in Nietzsche. And that's why he rightly says in Zarathustra, behind your small spirit, the ego, there is the great spirit, the body. Okay, the body is the great spirit for Nietzsche, which in Klagesian terms is body and soul, because the body cannot be without a soul. But Nietzsche, as an admirer of the Greeks, was, more on the body pole of the bipolar unity of Klages. Okay, that's why body is the word Nietzsche uses when he means, in Klagesian terms, body and soul. And the body is the great spirit for Nietzsche. It does not argue, it does not think, it does not speculate, it does not persuade, it commands metabolically. This is the core of Nietzschean will to power when understood in the Dionysian sense. It is the body that walks through the centuries, as he says in Zarathustra. That's why even cognition is evaporation of the cellular metabolic processes, and that's why he coins this concept of decadence as a dying body and ill body, and the fumes that are coming out of it are decadent cognitive conceptualizations, which he would see, as all of the European philosophy, religion, and science since the early Hellenes is decadent, falling down from the original heroic, strong body and ecstatic self-expression of the early Hellenes, which to my, great satisfaction, I have renamed to be the last Pelasgians. That's why my project, The New Argonauts. The New Argonauts and the Old Argonauts, firstly to explain the Old Argonauts, were the Mycenaeans, the early Hellenes that came to the Peloponnese in, let us say, 1200, 1000 BC. They're influenced by the last Pelasgians, by my beloved Atlanteans, the culture on Crete, Pelasgians, the Minoans, and they merge and they form the Mycenaean culture, during which time the great mythology of the Argonauts, has its origin. I talk about it on very many places. You will find it on YouTube. So by now back, Nietzsche had this conception of the will to power, which is biological, which is in complete congruence with the Klagesian realm of ever merging, dissolving into one another, attracting one another, repulsing one another, soul fields of the biosphere, which comprises all plants, all animals, and all elementary conglomerates, according to Whitehead, as lakes, rivers, mountains, meadows, and so on. This is the paradise in which no ego intrudes. Animals do not fear death. Individual organisms must end their cycle of being born, growing, ripening, bringing fruit, and dissipating, because otherwise there will be no renewal of beauty of cosmogonic eros. Young animals, young plants, especially now in spring, you can see it. They are all beautiful. And beauty is not aesthetic function, kind of an illusion, a fiction that is good for our health and spiritual well-being, as Nietzsche formulates it in a congruence with Kant. No, for Klages, beauty is an innate quality of the biosphere, the striving for harmony is beautiful in nature when it is not destroyed by the influence of the human ego. That a human ego can make natural beauty even more intense, like in gardens, okay, like a Zen garden, is true, but these are exceptions, and the exceptions are always there, but they, they are crushed under the majority of ego, functionality, capitalism, fast, project, speeding up, mechanization, dehumanization, war, life destruction, transhumanism, artificial intelligence, the complete destruction of the planetary life by the Geist via the human soul and body, which it has under control. In the last stages of human race, the Adversaries, the robots, the cyborgs, okay, will be dominant according to Klages. But there is also hope. Klages has great hope for the Great Mother. Deep in the soul field of the Mother Planet, there are processes, there are merging soul fields of such enormous vastness in the deep core of the earth, the whole mountain ranges, the volcanoes. Several times in the life history of the planet, species were obliterated because they did not enhance the beauty, the harmony, and the intensity and the variety of the soul experience of the planet. The planet is a unity of all soul fields, of its individual children, individual organisms, and it has an innate tendency to diversity, depth, richness. And if there are species that are like a dead end, or even more like the reptiles, they were dominant species in the biosphere 160 million circles of the planet around the sun. Our human race, with all its squirrel ancestors, has been orbiting the sun, let us say, 5 million times. Now to see the reptile is much more Okay, and they were erased because they did not evolve, they did not create art, they did not love the basically the soul field of the reptiles was not able to expand to such a vastness that they would stand below the stars and in awe look at the moon, at the distant stars, which then the apes, the early apes, slowly were able to do. It was a risky evolutionary step to grant this to the apes because there was the possibility already there immanent that the richness of their souls will be so vast that they will have to have a recourse to the stopping of the mirror of the soul, of turning it back into the Husserlian retention. And there a similarity appeared between the quality of the acosmic Geist, the timeless and spaceless entity about which we cannot say anything. It is completely from other universe, other cosmos, that it was attracted, or the other way around, if we keep to our metaphor that the greater attracts the smaller. So the acosmic entity, Geist, is penetrating the whole cosmos, as we know it, where time and space is functional, and it sucked in this little opening, or it, from another perspective, it penetrated into this human or ape soul field, early humans, and then started to do those cognitive functional transformations as we have described them. We are keeping to this main axis, the axis mundi of our speech today morning, like describing the individual transformations of the soul field through the ego, not that arises originally in every human being and in childhood. The ego is functionally being, produced. We cannot see grown. It does not grow. It appears. And the strange stuff is that it is the same entity, qualitatively the same entity, which induces this change in every human child. Wow. But why then are we different? Because we are different as bodies and souls. This is another contribution by Klages, who's a great characterologist. He writes big books, the principles of the science of expression, for example, the principles of characterology. Well, I can save you several years by giving you the summary. Body is individual. The child has an individual body, which is the flower of the family, of the ethnic group, of the landscape where these ancestors have lived. Genetic and epigenetic phenomena produce a human body in the womb of a mother. The soul is individual because there was different tradition, different mythologies, stories, fairy tales, different housing, different approach to the child, talking or how the birth and the character was then shaped in the family, in the landscape. Everything very individual. So you have an individual body, an individual soul. This is called character. And into it, then the spark, the knot, the pebble, the viral software of always the same Geist infiltrates, infuses itself, okay, like a virus, and changes the character, and then you have personality, you have the ego and the person. You can use this as synonym: personal, egoistic, transformation of the individual character. And we describe it in functional terms as far as possible, scientifically, on a, let us say, almost molecular level, when we look into the transformations of the soul field. As we have done, first the ego spark, then the coating of the ego, not with the mirror, which is the natural original function of the soul field, the mirror of the soul. These words must be used when we talk about the soul. Without the cognitive acts, then it is the mirror of the soul and not a image consciousness as you use it, because this is confusing. We have to see these two realms very apart now. So what comes next? We have explained the transfer of energy as it is done in the realm of the biosphere without the ego. The larger attracts the smaller. The merging realm is also, ontologically speaking, the realm where feeling, emotion, phenomenal experience, vision, touch, taste, smell as qualities are born. Then this, when repeated, embodies into the living body of the organisms. Okay, so the species are, kind of transformation of the biosphere as a whole into individual bodies that can move, or plants do not move, but then animals can move. This is all an expression of this innate tendency in the biosphere of the planetary body to diversify, to enrich the soul experience of the planetary soul. Okay, species that do not contribute to this, on the contrary, they begin to destroy this variety and to flatten the soul experience into a kind of numerical, conceptual, deserts. They will be obliterated. It takes some time for the biosphere to answer the attack of the spirit of the Geist through the human race. It took 160 million circles of the planetary body around the sun to obliterate the reptiles. Humans are still there. And I, as a poet, have a kind of vision that it is because of those people, souls and bodies like Klages, like Krishnamurti, like Nietzsche, like the many bards and poets and dreamers and wanderers and gardeners and lovers of nature and sportsmen and musicians who can get into ecstasy, dissolving their ego, or throwing it away by a violent act of body action, adrenaline sports and so on. that they then truly contribute to the mother soul field experiences that are, unique, deep, and the Mother Gaia, the soul of the mother, enjoys this. This is a real, not progress to some apocalyptic end. It is a true enlargement of the beautiful home of the organic being, organic entities on in the planet. They are the body of the earth in a certain sense also, but as a whole they beautify the biosphere, their home. And then the embodiment is again beautiful works of art, beautiful dancing bodies, beautiful children playing. And when there it comes to the maximum, when there is also erotic love of a young man and a young woman under the wings of Cosmogonic Eros. You can read about it in the book of Klages on Cosmogonic Eros. Then the biosphere celebrates the crown of evolution. So, but the destruction is always lurking around. Envy, hate, stupidity of the, Nietzsche would say, of the masses, of the herds, destroys those individual, fantastic, beautiful human souls and bodies. So what is there next? Will to power was the second transformation of the soul field. First was the coating of the ego with the mirror surface of the soul so that it can mirror itself. Then the realization of selfness immediately leads to consciousness of the cognitive, consciousness of the objects, and immediately after that the will arises, the egoistic personal willing to have this, or as the Buddhists say, to be united with the object of desire, the Trishna, the thirst, or to be, far away from the objects of hate. We want to have this, we don't want to be close to this, and so the selective ego acts arise, wanting, willing, desiring. Now watch the change of energy. Whereas before the ego, the little child was a little animal, a little dog, a little cat. It was pulled into the larger soul fields of the mother, of the food, drinking, of the light when it was drawn to the garden from the room, and so on. Now when the ego is there, as we have said, the ego does not have any life energy of its own. It has to be parasite. It has to transform. It has to reprogram. It has to change the direction of the energy flow. It simply seizes the energy that is coming to it from the external largest soul field, condenses it, narrows it, flattens the field, and projects it toward the object in a completely, different, opposite direction from the ego towards the object. But the energy is still the energy of the soul field. There are no mentons or some fictitious particles of the Geist that could be dissipated into the soul field and then do the stuff, do the working acts. No, it is always a transformed soul field. Okay? And the direction of the energy flow is reversed. It is not now, I am not being pulled into that embracement of what my soul and body desires innately, because we are similar, and the body and soul needed to thrive. Now I have an egoistic act of, well, I want this, and it is a small, narrow light beam, let us say metaphorically, an arrow of cognitive will to power energy that hits the object and causes the motion of the body towards it, to possess it, to control it. And here Nietzsche made a mistake that was inherent in his split character. He confused the firstly described biological will to power that is passively drawing you, your body and your soul, to the larger entities. He confused it with this narrow shot of will to power energy, which is cognitive act, and he transformed it later into the Machiavellian, the Caesarian, the Superman, Übermensch, cognitive will to power, which will press its hand on history for hundreds of years as on warm wax. These are diametrically different expressions of the soul, of the human soul. The one is the biological will to power, the passive, the great body that goes through the history. The conception of this leads to Nietzschean conception of decadence of the body, which cannot be reversed, which always only enhances itself by the futile projects of the ego and the superego, because the institutions, the governments, the religions, the scientific institutions, and so on, are an agglomerations of egos into a superego. That is, they are decadent, and they invent various programs that only enhance the self-destruction in a Spenglerian way. And so this critique you have towards those madmen of transhumanism and techno-fascism and accelerationism, as you call it, is well founded also in Nietzsche. They are not going to achieve a sudden quality transformation of the human race by enhancing the capitalism. They are going to finally destroy it. Okay, when Mother Nature does not interfere, as Klages, I would say he hopes. He is pessimist as far as the human contribution to self-change is concerned, because the egos can produce only more of the ego bullshit. But the mother, and the Nietzschean will to power, the Dionysian one, the truly biological one, we would say with Klages, the truly soul and body induced one, will probably make changes that will obliterate the human race for, as we know it, to save the beautiful life and soul experiences of so many so many organisms, her children, and we, the poets and the bards and the philosophers of life, the the biocentric phenomenologists and the farmers and the craftsmen and the new Pelasgians and the new Argonauts, the sportsmen who pursue sport and body motion as an ecstasy of cosmogonic eros, we can contribute to a change that will keep some of the human race still flowering here. Let's turn back to our functional description of the ego transformation of that clear pond of the soul, mirror into which the pebble, the virus of the ego, has invaded through the little, fissure of the Husserlian retention. We have covered the arising of self-consciousness, consciousness, and the will to power. All of them can be described as acts of cognition. First, ego, then the first act of cognition, self-realization, then the consciousness of objects, a cognitive act of objectifying perception. In other words, a cognitive act of objectifying perception transforms the passive phenomenal perception of ever-changing colors, shapes, smells, haptic, pressure, perception, a kind of impressionistic soup in which the little children and little animals live for some time after coming into this world. Next one is conceptual thinking. The cognitive personal acts of conceptual thinking, which changes the flow of phenomenal experience that is no more kind of impressionistic like in the early stages of the human children, that it acquires a kind of distinct shape, color, smell, but nevertheless it is kind of expressionistic, we could say, because the soul is already contributing a lot to the image of the world, okay? Whereas in the first stage, it is impressionistic. You are being totally, impressed by the large soul fields of the mother, of the food, of the wind, of the sun. You are simply a little animal with no ego. But once you have the ego in a rudimentary state, still, in the adolescent, in the puberty, you have it as the Pelasgians had it. It serves life. It is a function of the soul that is utilized to improve life conditions. You can work with the tools. You can, pursue agriculture, production of clothing and shoes, and taking care of the animals, inventing rituals to celebrate the elementary beauty of nature, the elementary mythology and cults of the various kinds of Pelasgians or Aborigines or native ethnic groups. You know that it is all beautiful and it is expression of their already egoistic soul fields, but nevertheless frequently festivals, dancing, ego is dissolved. Very many ethnic groups of Pelasgians, of Aborigines. They have rituals with plant drugs and so on. They readily dissolve the ego. They have a circular conception of time, spring, summer, winter. They don't hurry, they don't have a timetable, and they don't produce mass technologically possible millions of the same identical almost objects of consumerism and so on. They don't run like crazy for holidays somewhere, catching the train and full all-inclusive lying on the beaches separated by barbed wire from the hungry last Aborigines somewhere on the luxury resorts and eating around the clock, getting ill, fat, and stupid. Well then, when this kind of already egoistically transformed perception, but nevertheless a perception which serves normal functioning of those ethnic original groups of humans, when it is transformed into abstract thinking, then all the individual phenomena are obliterated. What arises is empirical science, metaphysical religion, and kind of philosophy, idealistic philosophy, conceptual world, politics, pedagogy, medicine, education, whatever you want, based on the concepts that were, invented by the ego. This is the next operation of the ego in the soul field. And as you have seen, it started with Renaissance in the Indo-European ethnic groups very massively. I have another string of ideas, another river flowing through all my last year's lectures that are the problems with the Indo-Europeans who have obliterated, who have, destroyed all the Pelasgian cultures in East Europe, South Europe, and Western Europe, and Mediterranean seas above all, during the Indo-European invasion into Europe, like 4000 BC to 1500 BC. These nomadic warrior tribes, men on horses, have two main functioning models for their civilization. It is the military Eldorado and the metaphysical Eldorado. Since they have destroyed all resources to sustain themselves in their original homelands in the Asiatic steppe between the Ural Mountains and the Baikal Sea, they were forced to migrate slowly through thousands of years and to militarily conquer original Pelasgian, let us say, ethnic groups on the territory of, first Levant and then India, first India, then Levant, then Eastern Europe, then Southern Europe, then Western Europe, and Northern Europe, all the Vikings, all the Goths, all the Dorians, all the Aryans, and whatever you call them, the later Anglo-Saxons and Franks and Vikings, I've already said, they were living in the same original homeland in today's Russia. And they migrated out of necessity, and because they could not take their totems with them, the holy groves and holy mountains, they invented very early abstract sky gods. Because as nomads, they were on the road, and what remained was the sky above that was always there. They didn't bow down to the earth because they were not inclined to love the Mother Earth. They didn't love their women in a sense of admiration. They had them simply functioning behind the military lines in the yurts as the producers of new warriors and the repairers of clothes and cooking machines and so on. The women they knew were only the ones they raped during the assault on a city whom they murdered. So, well then, they were not inclined to worship the mothers. They worship the sky gods, those who can throw lightning bolts and hammers like Zeus and Thor. And they have this military Eldorado as the first functioning, model of existence, the treasures, the resources, the slaves, the new territories are there somewhere beyond this area which we have already destroyed. So we go there, we invade, we conquer, we rule, and we celebrate ourselves. How strong we are, our bards will sing about it. If there is nothing to do, if everything is conquered, and there is no way to expand, then this Nietzsche would call biological will to power. The animal warrior Viking style body transforms into a cognitive series of cognitive acts that I call metaphysical Eldorado. It is the origin of all Indo-Europeanly based religions, sciences, philosophies, and political institutions. You see, Iranian Zoroastrianism is the earliest of them. Then the Hebrew Semitic Yahwism, another one. Christianity as a variation of Hebrew metaphysics. In the realm of religion, very Indo-European kind of conquest-like, only the realms are now heavens and hells. The war goes on. The final battle is guaranteed. The Armageddon, the apocalypse. La la la. So, you can look at the European history and see it exactly evolving. Two modes of existence, metaphysical Eldorado or military Eldorado. Metaphysical Eldorado is a second choice if there is no military Eldorado possible, like in the 1,000 years of Middle Ages, where sailing was not developed, technology was not developed enough to sail over the Atlantic and conquer the rest of the planet. Then there was 1,000 years of speculation, metaphysical Eldorado. End of the 19th century, where it seemed that the division of the planet is concluded, there came another great explosion of philosophy, metaphysical Eldorado. Nietzsche belongs to that. Some of them on the side of life, as Klages then. And then the decision, no, it is not enough. We becoming truly decadent in the 20s, and so before the 20s, another military Eldorado will save us. First World War, Second World War, and the short periods of recovery between, because it's so good not to be killed when the war is over and just to recover, but as soon as we look around and when we recover, what are the military Eldorados? Are there someone? The resources, essentially. It is not possible that, we don't have the resources. We have to take them from the other ones who possess them. It is not just. And then with time it is all getting faster and faster. In between, the metaphysical Eldorados produce all kind of deconstruction and post-structuralism and neoliberalism and transhumanism and so I hope you have got some hints into the deep functioning description of how the entity X, and Klages calls it sometimes entity X, sometimes Geist, sometimes acosmic. Now, you have used the term Geist, so let's keep to that. How Geist invades the soul. We have described it in vivid spatial analogies. Okay, so now what? It's already 11. I have to go.